Hey there, welcome. In today's video, we're going to be looking at 5 of the most common mistakes that students make in academic task 1. Now, these are mistakes that prevent our students from getting a band 7 or above in their IELTS writing. So, for this video, we're going to be using this. It's an academic task 1 question, and the rubric says, the table below shows the population in millions of 8 countries in 2008 and 2018. It also shows the percentage of growth in population between these two dates. And as always, the question would say, summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So the first thing we would do is spend 2 to 4 minutes analyzing the graphic, and that's what we're going to do now. So we can see that we have the percentage growth between 2008 and 2018, and we have 8 different countries. So looking at Angola, we can see that between 2008 and 2018, their population increased. Likewise with Brazil, also Canada. In Japan, the population decreased between 2008 and 2018. In Nigeria, it increased. In Pakistan, it increased. In Romania, it decreased. And in Russia, the population stayed the same. So we have 5 countries that increased in population, 2 countries that decreased in population, and 1 country that stayed the same. And we're going to be using this kind of information to help explain the 5 common mistakes that students make when answering these questions. The next thing we would do when we're analyzing the graphic is to look for extremes, to look for superlatives. So if we look at 2008, we can see that the largest population was in Brazil, and the lowest population was in Romania. Afterwards, if we look at 2018, we can see the highest population in Pakistan, so there's been a change there, and the lowest population is still in Romania. And finally, if we look at the next column, or the last column, percentage growth, we can see that the largest growth was in Angola, and the smallest growth, or rather the largest negative growth, was in Romania. So, now that we've analysed the graphic, it's time to look at some of the common mistakes that students make when answering academic task 1 questions. And the first one is the wrong overview. Okay, I'm going to show you 2 overviews, and I want you to decide which one do you think is the correct overview. Here's overview 1. Overall, in 2008, Brazil had the largest population, followed by Pakistan and Nigeria. However, by 2018, Pakistan had overtaken Brazil to become the country with the largest number of inhabitants. Okay, let's have a look at overview 2. Overall, 5 countries experienced an increase in population growth: Angola, Brazil, Canada, Nigeria, and Pakistan. 1 country, Russia, did not change, and 2 countries saw a reduction in their population figures, Romania and Japan. Now take a second. Which of these 2 overviews would you write? Which one do you think is correct? Okay, so the answer is overview 2. If you look at overview 1, which is not correct, we can see that it focuses too much on specific countries. It focuses on Brazil, Pakistan, and Nigeria, and as a result, it misses out a lot of countries. It doesn't mention Russia, or Romania, or Nigeria, for example. In overview 2, we give a general description of the trends, a general description of what happens to all of the categories, so all of the countries. We know that, for example, there are 5 countries that increased in population, and we mention these countries. There are 2 countries that saw a decrease in population, Romania and Japan. And then we also mentioned that Russia does not change. So we're giving a general description of all of the categories. a general description of all of the countries. Okay. We could also, in fact, improve the overview too by mentioning that the highest growth was in Angola and the highest, or the country that shrunk the most in terms of population, was Romania. So this overview could be improved. But in general, overview 2 is a good overview, and overview 1 focuses too much on specific countries. Now, writing the correct overview is very important. According to the public band descriptors, at band 6 it says presents an overview with information appropriately selected. And at band 7 it says presents a clear overview of main trends, differences or stages. So if we're looking to get a band 7, 8 or 9, we really need to have a clear overview. So how do we get better at writing the overview? Well, the most important thing to do is to practice, practice, practice. So one thing I would suggest is look at practice IELTS Task 1 questions, and you can find these either online or in the Cambridge practice test series. And you don't have to write the full answer for all of the questions, but just write the overview for as many questions as you possibly can. And then compare these with other students, or show your teacher and see if you're getting a good idea of how to report the overview. You can also do our online course, and our online course is a premium IELTS course which focuses on what you need to do to be ready in all parts of the academic IELTS test. And in that course we have a full section on how to write an overview with quizzes, practice activities, videos, and we specifically look at each of the question types. So all of the graphic types that you can get in academic task 1. So process diagrams, map diagrams, pie charts, all of these. And then we look at how to write an overview for all of them. But here are some quick tips. First of all, spend 2 to 4 minutes analyzing the graphic before you start writing. And that's what we did at the beginning of this video. Before we would even write the introduction or the overview, we already have a clear idea of what information is in the graphic. Put your overview at the beginning of your answer after the introduction. So we would have introduction, overview, and then the body paragraphs below. Some people also like to put the overview at the end of their answer, and that's also fine, but we generally recommend putting it before your body paragraphs. And that's because what you identify in your overview often changes the order of your body paragraphs. So for example, in this overview we identified countries that increase, countries that stay the same, and countries that decrease in population. Now, because we identified that in our overview, we would also have our body paragraphs reflecting that. So we would have one paragraph about the countries that increase, another paragraph about the countries that stay the same, or Russia, and then a final paragraph which talks about the countries that have decreased in population. Okay, the third tip. Start your overview with overall. And that's because you make it incredibly easy for the examiner to see that you have an overview in your answer. And that's something that it's likely that they're going to be looking for when it comes to grading your answer. Next, focus on the general trend in all of the different categories. So remember, when we looked at the 2 overviews, the first one focused specifically on the highest populations in both years, whereas the second overview gave a general description of all of the categories. So a general description of all of the countries in this case. So that's one tip. And finally, it's important that you learn to write or learn what to write for your overview for different graphic types, and you need to practice these before you go into the exam. So for example, in map diagrams, where you have one map, for example, in the past and another in the present, what are you going to do when you write an overview for this? Likewise with a process diagram. A process diagram, for example, is the process of making something, like the process of making wine or the process of making cement, and it's a popular graphic type in task 1. So when you get one of these process diagrams, what are you going to do for your overview? Similarly, if you have a prediction, you need to make sure that you're mentioning this in your overview. So it's important that you practice all of the different graphic types before you go to do your IELTS writing test. Okay, let's move on to mistake number 2, and that is missing out one of the categories. So we have 8 countries. We've got Angola, Brazil, Canada, Japan, Nigeria, Pakistan, Romania, and Russia. Now, in our answer, we need to mention all 8 countries. If we miss out one of these countries, then we're not fully reporting the graphic. For example, if your answer fails to mention Russia, then you're not going to get a high score because you're missing out some of the information. Let's look at some quick tips. So when you're analyzing the graphic, look, how many categories are there? In this case, there are 8 countries that we need to mention. Look for superlatives. So we saw that Angola experienced the largest population growth over the period. Think about how we can group the categories. So for example, in this case, we have countries that increase in population between 2008 and 2018, and we can group those together. Also, check if there are any predictions, and if there are, make sure that you mention this in your overview, but also in the rest of your answer. If it's a process diagram, well, how many stages are there? And if it's a map diagram, how many differences are there? This is the kind of thing that you should be looking at when you're analyzing the graphic and making sure to mention in your answers. Okay, mistake number 3, not using logical paragraphs. So I'm going to show you 2 different plans, and I want you to think about which plan you think is more appropriate for this task. Plan number 1, we have the introduction first, the overview, and then BP1 stands for body paragraph 1. So in body paragraph 1, we would have the countries that increased in population. In body paragraph 2, we would have countries that stayed the same. And then in body paragraph 3, we would have countries that decreased in population. So in total, we have 5 paragraphs. Now look at plan 2. We have an introduction, an overview, so far the same. Now in body paragraph 1, we look at the first 4 countries, so Angola, Brazil, Canada, and Japan. And in body paragraph 2, we look at the last 4 countries, so Nigeria, Pakistan, Romania, and Russia. In this plan, we only have 4 paragraphs. Now, which one would you choose? The answer is you should choose plan 1. It's more logical when we group categories together into paragraphs. And not only would we get a higher score for coherence and cohesion, we're also likely to get a higher score for all of the other categories. So task, response, lexical resource, which is vocabulary, and grammatical range and accuracy. And that's because when we group information together, we can use more advanced grammar. So we can say, for example, things like, similar to Japan, Romania also experienced a decrease between 2008 and 2018. So by putting or grouping categories into the same paragraphs, we're likely to use more advanced grammar and more advanced vocabulary, which will help us to get a higher score in task 1. Okay, so some quick tips. Make sure you have at least 2 body paragraphs in your answer. It's fine to have 3 or 4 body paragraphs if that is logical, but you should have at least 2 body paragraphs. When you're analysing the graphic, look for ways to group categories into paragraphs. Avoid body paragraphs with only one sentence. So for example, in the plan that we just looked at, we had one body paragraph just about countries that stayed the same. So in this case, we only had Russia. Now, even though we're only looking at Russia, it's important to have 2 sentences about Russia so that we don't have one paragraph with just one sentence. Okay, mistake number 4. And that is repeating the same sentence structure. Look at all of these sentences. The population of Angola grew by 43%. The population of Brazil grew by 7%. The population of Canada grew by 12%. The population of Nigeria grew by 28%. The population of Russia stayed the same. The population of Japan shrunk by 2%. So these are all correct. They're grammatically correct, but they're the exact same sentence structure. Now, this is quite typical for low-level students. When low-level students tend to simply repeat the same sentence structure over and over again, while high-level students are able to come up with different grammatical structures to talk about the data. And this is something that you really need to be doing in your Task 1 answers. Let's have a look at some examples. So here are the repetitive sentences, and here are some other sentence structures that we can use. The largest growth in population can be seen in Angola, which registered a 43% increase over the period. Brazil experienced a 7% increase in population. Canada's population grew by 12%. An increase in population can also be seen in Nigeria, which grew by 28% between 2008 and 2018. Russia was the only country that registered the same number of inhabitants in 2008 and 2018. Japan's population decreased, reducing by 2% between 2008 and 2018. A good idea is when you're writing your practice answers, your practice essays, make sure to use a variety of different grammar structures and really make a point of changing the grammar structure that you're going to use to make sure that it's not repetitive. And by doing this in your practice answers, when it comes to writing your exam, you'll have a larger variety of grammatical structures that you can use in your answers. If you would like to see a video on different grammar structures that we can use in Task 1, then leave a comment below and we'll get onto it. Okay, finally we have mistake number 5. Now, have a look at the sentence. Romania's population decrease is likely to have come about as a result of low fertility rates and emigration to countries such as Germany, the United Kingdom, and Italy. Now, is this a good sentence? Well, it's grammatically correct, and there's lots of good vocabulary, and it makes sense, but this isn't the right kind of sentence to put in to academic task 1. In academic task 1, you're asked to simply summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Now, this sentence attempts to explain the data, or it attempts to explain the data in the graphic, and that is the final mistake. Don't explain the data. You simply need to report it and make comparisons. Okay, I hope this has helped, and best of luck with all of your studies, and I'll see you in the next lesson. See you soon. Bye.